Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
If you joined us for the recent Metabolic Revolution main episode, we sort of touched on this really radical idea that maybe the most aggressive health protocols, the ones the biohacking community loves, are actually fundamentally counterproductive.
Right. We teased this idea that maybe chronic suffering isn't the path to optimization.
Exactly. Well, today we are going deeper. We are ripping the Band-Aid off the entire, and I mean the entire flawed concept of hormesis.
That's right. And this deep dive, it's just so necessary because, as we talked about, the bioenergetic framework really challenges that conventional wisdom.
The idea that you have to push your body to the brink.
Yeah, to achieve resilience. The longevity crowd, the biohackers, they've embraced hormesis as gospel.
Yeah.
And in doing that, they've accidentally normalized this state of chronic metabolic depletion, all in this relentless pursuit of
short-term biomarkers.
Exactly. Acute short-term numbers.
Yeah. So our mission today, let's be explicit, is to explore the real evidence behind this whole stress-induced adaptation thing.
Yeah.
We want to expose why so many of these protocols,
The 48-hour fasts, the cold plunges.
the punishing HIE sessions,
okay.
why they're based on a total misunderstanding of the body's energy economics.
Yeah.
And we're going to make the case definitively that genuine support always trumps needless suffering.
And the core thesis we're really drilling into is just, it's so critical for anyone trying to be healthy today. The mainstream biohacking approach has fully embraced a concept, hormesis, that when you apply it to a modern person who is already stressed,
Which is pretty much everyone.
it's everyone. It causes profound long-term metabolic damage, even if that damage is masked by some, temporarily perfect lab results. We have to understand the history, the biology, and the energy cost of this deception.
Okay, let's unpack that central observation first because it creates this huge cognitive dissonance. We call it the biohacker aging paradox.
You see it everywhere online.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
It's this visual conflict between the claim, I'm optimizing, and the actual appearance of the person making the claim. You see these super disciplined people, they're ticking every single box meticulously.
Oh, they're the picture of dedication. They're promoting the weekly 48-hour fasts, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit with HIIT and heavy weights.
Doing the ice baths every single morning.
And investing a fortune in things like NAD drips or, the trendy longevity drugs like metformin or rapamycin. If pure dedication equaled biological age reversal, these people should look like they're 30 forever.
But they often don't. When you look closely, really look, away from the perfect lighting and the filters, what do you see?
You see stress.
They look stressed.
Yeah.
Gaunt, even kind of wiry. They project this appearance of running entirely on cortisol and adrenaline.
That's the telltale look, isn't it? It's premature aging, the drawn features, the muscle loss, the lack of that subcutaneous padding that really signals thriving health. It honestly looks like they've aged a decade in 5 years.
And that is the absolute paradox. Because when you pull up their lab results, their metrics are often, by current standards, flawless.
Off the charts. Their heart rate variability, their HRV is incredible, suggesting high nervous system adaptability. Their VO2 max is elite. Their inflammatory markers, CRP, are on the floor.
So they have the appearance of perfect health, at least based on the numbers they choose to prioritize.
Based on the data points, yes.
Okay, I have to step in here and play devil's advocate for a second, because this is the argument we always hear.
Go for it.
If all the chosen metrics, HRV, VO2 max, inflammation, if they're all perfect, why should we trust our subjective visual observation or even that feeling of running on fumes over hard scientific data?
Yeah.
Isn't it possible that what we see as gaunt is just the visual result of having really low body fat and inflammation, which the metrics confirm?
That is the crucial question. And the bioenergetic answer is that these metrics, they measure the system's reaction to stress, not its underlying capacity for health and repair.
Okay, break that down.
High HRV often means the nervous system is highly flexible and responsive. It reacts strongly to the stressor. But it doesn't measure the energy reserves, the actual ATP, needed to repair the damage from that stressor.
So they're boasting about these perfect metrics, but the lived experience.
The constant chill, the exhaustion, the loss of libido, the low body temperature, that tells the story of metabolic shutdown. The body looks old because the cellular machinery is running on emergency power. It's conserving energy at all costs, and that's visually expressed as depletion.
So they're measuring the responsiveness of the fire alarm, but the actual engine is sputtering.
Precisely. They have excellent short-term survival metrics, but terrible long-term thriving capacity. The whole premise of hormesis, that stress builds generalized strength, it only works if you start with like an infinite supply of energy, which in the modern world almost no one has.
Right. Most of us are starting from a deficit.
A significant deficit.
So to understand why this concept is so pervasive and honestly so seductive, we have to look at its history. This, for me, is the most shocking and, frankly, controversial piece of this whole deep dive.
It is. The idea that hormesis is some modern biological discovery is a complete myth.
We absolutely have to trace the origins of the term, because hormesis didn't come out of studies on exercise or fasting, did it?
Not at all. It originated in research looking at the effects of very low doses of, toxic substances, genuine pollutants.
Wow.
Yeah, things that sometimes appeared to stimulate a beneficial response, but usually just like growth or a temporary burst of activity in a very specific, very limited context.
And when you say toxic substances, we aren't talking about something benign.
No, not at all.
Right.
We were talking about serious industrial-grade pollutants, low-dose exposure to things like ionizing radiation, heavy metals, industrial solvents, pesticides. The observation was simple. If you give an organism a tiny, tiny amount of poison, it might show a temporary uptick in one specific function.
Like what?
For instance, a low dose of radiation might speed up cell division in a petri dish for a short time.
Okay, but here is where the kind of conspiracy theory turns into corporate fact. You've documented that this concept was aggressively promoted starting in the 1950s. Why then? And who's behind it?
The timing is everything. The promotion was driven primarily by the big, powerful industries, petroleum, chemical, and nuclear.
Of course.
This was the era of massive public concern over environmental toxicity. People were worried about fallout from nuclear testing, the widespread use of new chemicals. These industries faced enormous regulatory and financial pressure.
So instead of cleaning up the pollution, their strategy was to reframe the pollution itself as a health benefit, using scientific-sounding language.
It was a genius if morally bankrupt, corporate defense strategy. Hormesis became a scientific-sounding excuse to justify exposing the public and the environment to toxins. The argument shifted from, this radioactive fallout is dangerous, to,
actually, a little bit of radiation is hormetic. It's making you more resilient.
exactly. Why spend billions on cleanup when you can spend a few million on lobbying and research to claim the poison is actually good for you?
That is it's chilling. It means the very foundation of the modern biohacker principle that stress strengthens you was originally used to dismiss the dangers of mercury in the water, radiation in the air, pesticide residues on food.
And the scientific integrity was just thrown out the window. Researchers like Dr. Peat exposed how often the data was cherry-picked. They'd focus on one single favorable endpoint that showed a temporary positive effect and just conveniently ignore the systemic cost of that intervention.
Give us that concrete example you mentioned before, the one with dioxin. It just perfectly illustrates this idea of shifting damage around instead of creating a real benefit.
Yeah, that example is devastatingly clear. Dioxin is a known highly toxic chemical. In some of these dose-response studies, researchers saw that low hormetic doses of dioxin led to a reduction in cancer rates in a few specific organs, and that was the headline they promoted. Dioxin prevents cancer.
The optimization narrative.
Exactly. But when you looked at the organism as a whole, the overall systemic burden hadn't decreased at all. That same dose of dioxin simultaneously increased cancer rates in the liver, the lung, the tongue, and the nasal passages.
So you didn't eliminate the cancer risk. You just traded one type of damage for another.
Precisely. The organism wasn't healthier. The damage was just moved somewhere else in the system.
And that is the fundamental flaw we are still fighting today. We're taking a concept designed to excuse industrial poison, which just shifts damage around, and applying it to our own bodies. We're trading long-term thyroid health for a temporary norepinephrine rush in a cold plunge.
It's the same flawed cost-benefit trade-off. Except now we're voluntarily inflicting the stress on ourselves, all based on a historically dubious and frankly corrupt premise.
Okay, so to move beyond that controversial history and get into the actual biology of why generalized stress is so depleting, we have to look at the foundational work of Hans Selye.
Yes. Selye's General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS, from the mid-20th century. It's the lens through which we have to view all these modern hormetic practices. It describes this predictable, biological, three-stage response the body has to any persistent stressor.
And it doesn't matter what the stressor is, right? A bear chasing you or a 5-day water fast.
It's all the same to the body.
So let's break down those stages and pay close attention to where the modern biohacker gets stuck.
Okay, stage 1 is the alarm reaction. This is immediate, acute mobilization. The threat registers, the body pools resources instantly. We see sympathetic nervous system activation, adrenaline spikes, cortisol rises, heart rate, blood pressure, they all shoot up. It's the classic fight or flight.
And that adrenaline spike is probably responsible for that initial high people get from, say, an intense workout on an empty stomach.
Oh, absolutely. Then you move into stage 2, resistance. If the stressor continues, the body starts to adapt to cope with that specific demand. Stress hormone levels, they normalize a little, but they're still elevated above baseline. The body is reorganizing its energy use to survive.
And this is where the biohackers live.
This is their home. They achieve tolerance to the cold, or they feel like they've adapted to the long fasts, and they mistake this temporary survival mechanism for true optimization.
They see that phase of adaptation, that tolerance, and they think the protocol is a success. They think it's sustainable. But Selye's model clearly shows there's a final, inevitable stage if the stress keeps going.
Which is stage 3, exhaustion. The adaptive capacity, that finite pool of energy and resources used for resistance, it just gets depleted. The endocrine system starts to fail. The body loses its ability to regulate temperature, blood pressure, immune function. This is where chronic diseases develop, and the organism eventually, well, it succumbs.
The really critical insight from Selye that gets buried in this whole Hormesis discussion is the nature of the resources being used. Why is this so non-negotiable for modern life?
Because Selye proved that all stressors draw from the same adaptive pool. This is the hill we have to die on. Your body does not have specialized reserves for specific stresses. The HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, it's the master regulator. It responds to everything the same way by demanding a mobilization of energy.
Can you give us, like, a quick analogy for how the HPA axis works, just to make it really clear for the listener?
Yeah, sure. Think of the HPA axis as a super reactive, unified corporate headquarters for survival. The hypothalamus, the H, is the alarm system. It sees the threat, the cold, the famine, the work deadline. It signals the pituitary, the P, which is like the middle manager.
Okay.
The pituitary then sends the command to the adrenal glands, the A, which are the production factory. And that factory pumps out the stress hormones, cortisol, and adrenaline. This whole system it activates instantly, whether the stress is real or something you chose to do.
In the factory, the adrenals, they don't stop and ask, hey, wait, is this because of my chronic debt stress? Or is this because I just willingly jumped into a 35-degree bath?
Not at all. The HPA axis cannot distinguish between them. It just registers the net demand on the system. And when you factor in the massive, unmanaged stresses of modern life, the sleep deprivation, the psychological burden of work, the constant blue light, the inflammatory diet, you realize that adaptive pool is already running on fumes.
So by introducing deliberate stressors like intense HIIT or extended fasting, we're not building new capacity. We're just throwing extra demands onto a system that's already struggling.
We are accelerating the journey straight towards stage 3 exhaustion. Adaptation in this context is merely survival. It's the body slowing down all non-essential functions, like metabolism, reproduction, repair, just to make sure the heart and brain keep going. That is the exact opposite of optimization.
Okay, let's ground this in specific protocols then.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the actual physiological consequences of the two most common beneficial stressors: cold exposure and extending fasting. What is the real cellular cost?
Let's start with cold exposure. It's achieved this near cult status. When you get in an ice bath, your body perceives an immediate acute threat of hypothermia. The response is this massive hormonal surge designed to save your life.
Vasoconstriction, shivering.
Right, and enormous spikes in adrenaline and norepinephrine. The goal is rapid heat production and conservation. And this is where the thyroid, the accelerator pedal of your metabolism, does something that directly contradicts the goal of metabolic health.
What does it do?
To conserve energy and prevent internal heat loss, the body initiates a profound regulatory change. Thyroid function is suppressed.
Wow.
Specifically, the conversion of the inactive thyroid hormone T4 into the active form T3 is dramatically reduced. This is deliberate metabolic downregulation. The body is saying we are in a hostile, cold environment. We have to lower the baseline metabolic rate to survive and conserve fuel.
So chronic cold exposure is effectively training your body to be permanently set to a lower, more frugal metabolic baseline. You become better at conserving heat, which means you burn fewer calories at rest.
That is the long-term physiological cost. You sacrifice your basal metabolic rate for a temporary psychological high and a norepinephrine rush. The chronic cold adapter is usually someone who feels cold all the time and struggles immensely to lose weight, even on a very restrictive diet.
The anecdote you shared about your client, Marcus, is such a perfect encapsulation of this.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the extent of his metabolic shutdown.
Yeah, this client was so dedicated. Daily cold plunges, intense training, meticulous tracking. He was convinced he was optimizing. But his body temperature was consistently low. Morning temps were shockingly down at 96.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's really low.
It's very low. He'd hit a complete weight loss wall despite only eating 1,500 calories a day. He was chronically exhausted, and his sex hormones, like testosterone, were completely tanked. His body was just stuck in deep survival mode.
And yet, I bet he had great HRV and low inflammation markers, which kept him believing the protocol was working.
Exactly. We stopped the cold plunges immediately. We focused purely on support. More food, eliminating high PUFA fats, and prioritizing warmth-hot baths, warm clothing, gentle movement. Within 3 weeks, his temperature rose to a much healthier 98.2.
That's incredible.
His energy surged, his hormones recovered, and he naturally started to lose weight because the metabolic brake pedal had finally been released. The cold was systematically shutting him down.
Let's apply that same survival logic to extended fasting, the other pillar of the hormetic movement.
Extended fasting, so anything beyond just skipping an occasional meal, it forces the body into the same state of emergency survival. As soon as your liver glycogen runs out, blood sugar drops. The HPA axis immediately triggers a massive cortisol release to drive gluconeogenesis.
Which is, in simple terms, the process of literally manufacturing sugar by breaking down your own body. Mostly lean tissue, like muscle and organ protein. You're eating yourself for fuel.
You're cannibalizing yourself to keep the brain fed. At the same time, adrenaline rises to mobilize fatty acids. And critically, just like with cold, thyroid hormone conversion plummets, the body reads starvation as a definitive signal. Conserve energy immediately.
And that clarity high, the mental energy people feel during a fast, that's not what they think it is.
It's a stress hormone high. High levels of adrenaline and cortisol are inherently stimulating. You feel wired, focused, even euphoric. It's highly addictive because it's a powerful natural stimulant, but it's an unsustainable, depleting state. It's not true metabolic clarity. It is your body screaming, "Crisis! Must find food now!"
And to really illustrate the catastrophic cost of this, we have to talk about the Minnesota starvation experiment. That's the irrefutable historical proof.
That study is horrifyingly relevant today. These were healthy, mentally stable young men subjected to chronic calorie restriction, 1,800 calories a day, which again is often more than modern biohackers consume. The fallout was just profound.
What were some of the specific consequences?
Physiologically, they had a 40% drop in their basal metabolic rate. Their body temperatures dropped severely. They developed anemia, edema, severely suppressed hormones. But the psychological consequences were arguably worse. Severe depression, anxiety, extreme irritability, a near-total loss of libido.
And they became obsessed with food.
Obsessed, hoarding cookbooks, experiencing really disordered eating patterns. It sounds exactly like the psychological profile of someone deep into a severe, long-term restrictive diet today.
Because it's the inevitable outcome.
It is. And the most crucial part of that study was the recovery. It didn't take a few weeks to bounce back. It took years of eating 4,000 to 5,000 calories daily, way above their normal intake, to fully recover their metabolic function and psychological stability. It shows that metabolic suppression isn't a temporary inconvenience. It is a profound systemic injury.
Which brings us to the ultimate justification that everyone uses for fasting and stress, autophagy, this cellular recycling.
Ah, yes, the biohacker claim. I need to stress my body to activate autophagy and clear out cellular junk. It's necessary for longevity.
And that's wrong.
It's the single most significant area of misunderstanding. It's a classic reductionist flaw. We know dysfunctional autophagy is linked to disease, so the assumption is that stimulating more autophagy via stress must be good. But this ignores the vital role of available energy, ATP.
So you're saying the benefit of autophagy is entirely dependent on the cellular environment?
On the energy status.
Completely. Because autophagy is primarily activated by reactive oxygen species, or ROS, but ROS increases in two totally different physiological contexts that have completely opposing outcomes for the cell. This is the difference between life and depletion.
Okay, let's dedicate some real time to this. Explain those two contexts. Start with a good one.
Okay, context one is the high-energy, thriving state. This is when your mitochondria are working optimally, fully fueled, producing abundant ATP. The process of efficient energy production naturally leads to a controlled buildup of ROS. It's like a metabolic exhaust. This controlled ROS acts as the signaling molecule saying we have abundant energy, we're thriving, now we can afford to do routine maintenance. It signals things like making new mitochondria and high-quality autophagy.
Right. It's like pruning a well-fed, well-watered, fertilized plant. You cut off the dead branches to promote healthy, vigorous new growth because you have the resources, the water and fertilizer, to ensure that new growth happens immediately. The cell has the abundant ATP to not just break down junk, but to immediately build replacement parts.
Okay, that makes sense. Now compare that to context 2, which is the scenario that most people in this stress-seeking community are actually in.
Context 2 is the low-energy chronic stress state. This happens when mitochondrial function is inhibited by chronic cortisol, nutrient deficiency, toxins. The mitochondria are struggling and inefficient. This struggle also increases ROS, but for a different reason: cellular distress. This distress signal also activates autophagy. It's an emergency cleanup crew responding to a systemic failure.
But in this context, the energy required to actually complete the repair is missing.
Precisely. You have insufficient ATP. The cell breaks down tissues, and organelle's autophagy is running high. But it lacks the fuel and the resources to synthesize the replacement parts. It's a net catabolic state. You're breaking things down that you cannot afford to rebuild, leading to tissue loss, organ shrinkage, accelerated aging. You're hacking at a drought-stressed plant that's already dying.
So the biohacker is measuring the activation signal, the alarm bell of autophagy, and celebrating it while ignoring the fact that they're operating on an empty fuel tank and can't actually finish the job.
They're measuring the survival mechanism while accelerating depletion. They look gaunt because they are, quite literally, depleting their critical mass to fuel a non-productive cellular recycling process. The pursuit of longevity through stress has become synonymous with accelerated tissue loss.
We've established that chronic stress is depleting, but let's look at something potentially beneficial like sauna and how misuse can completely negate the intended adaptation.
Right. Even good tools can become counterproductive with poor timing. Heat therapy is a traditional, well-regarded practice. Saunas boost circulation, activate heat shock proteins, promote relaxation, all generally supportive things. The problem arises when you intentionally stack that heat stress with another intense stressor, particularly strength training.
We've been conditioned to believe that more stress equals more gain. But in the case of muscle growth, you're saying it's direct interference.
It is direct biological interference. When you lift weights, you create localized microdamage in the muscle. This is a purposeful injury that signals a localized inflammatory response needed for repair and hypertrophy muscle growth. This requires a dedicated allocation of energy and blood flow.
And what happens when you introduce intense heat right after that?
You trigger a massive competing systemic stress. The heat raises your core temp, and your body's priority switches instantly to survival. Blood flow, which was needed to deliver nutrients to the damaged muscle for repair, is now diverted massively to the skin's surface for cooling.
The repair crew is suddenly pulled away to fight an external fire.
That's a perfect way to put it. You're stealing resources. Studies have shown that immediate post-workout heat exposure, whether it's a hot bath or sauna, can blunt the signals for muscle protein synthesis and interfere with hypertrophy. You negate the beneficial adaptation you just worked so hard for in the gym.
So the simple bioenergetic recommendation is just separate the stressors.
Yes. Use the sauna on non-training days or several hours after the workout. Allow the body to dedicate resources to one adaptation at a time. It's all about respecting resource allocation.
And finally, that brings us to contrast therapy alternating ice plunges and saunas. This seems to be stress for the pure theatrical value of suffering.
Contrast therapy is chaotic. It's a highly taxing protocol. You are repeatedly whipsawing your autonomic nervous system. The cold triggers a massive sympathetic response, fight or flight. The heat triggers a massive parasympathetic rebound, rest, and digest. You just confuse the system, preventing it from truly settling into either state of adaptation. It's an exercise in nervous system exhaustion.
Now we have to address the influence of the celebrity biohacker. They're the ones promoting these intense protocols to millions of followers. But we always seem to ignore the context of their own resources.
The context is everything. The fundamental disconnect here is the severe resource disparity between the promoter and the average listener. The person promoting 48-hour fasts while maintaining shredded abs is operating with an infrastructure you simply do not have.
A comprehensive, high-level recovery infrastructure.
Absolutely. Private chefs ensuring optimal nutrient density. trainers and physical therapists managing structural damage, sleep specialists optimizing every minute of rest, and crucially, they have financial and social security that eliminates a massive layer of chronic stress, the mortgage, the tight deadlines, the financial worry.
They've created a perfectly supported environment that offsets the self-inflicted stress, so they can survive the cold plunge because their recovery tank is overflowing.
While they promote that same protocol to the listener who's dealing with a 50-hour work week, a 2-hour commute, severe sleep deprivation, chronic financial anxiety, and a diet of processed convenience foods, that listener is operating on a chronically depleted adaptive pool.
That listener, following the guru's advice, is literally driving a car with a flashing oil light and deciding to push the accelerator harder, hoping the stress will somehow fix the engine.
They're just accelerating their exhaustion timeline dramatically. And here's the visual evidence that gets ignored. Despite their optimal protocols, we are seeing many of these celebrity biohackers showing signs of poor aging in real time. The visible lack of tissue density, the muscle loss, the gaunt face, the early graying. These are not signs of optimal metabolic health. They're the visual hallmarks of chronic stage 3 exhaustion.
But let me circle back to my earlier challenge. Isn't this still subjective? If the celebrity has the best possible metrics, low cortisol, low CRP, high HRV, shouldn't we assume they're healthier than they look? Why trust our eyes over the lab?
Because the lab is often measuring the body's response to damage, not its ability to produce energy and repair. Low inflammation markers, for instance, might not mean the body is free of inflammation. It might mean the immune system is too suppressed by chronic cortisol to even mount an effective, measurable inflammatory response anymore.
And the high HRV?
High HRV is just flexibility of reaction, not depth of capacity. They're measuring how well the smoke detector works, not how much fuel is left in the house. The metrics are misleading because they're measuring acute signaling instead of systemic energy. If you look depleted, you are depleted, regardless of what your temporary stress markers say.
Okay, this is the most crucial pivot of the entire deep dive. If we've dismantled the idea that suffering is necessary, we have to provide the alternative. Under the bioenergetic framework, what actually leads to optimization?
We have to pivot entirely from stress to support. The whole philosophy of bioenergetics, championed by figures like Dr. Ray Peat, centers on maximizing protective factors and minimizing the low-level stressors that deplete our adaptive pool.
Let's go over Dr. Peat's core principle again, because it's the perfect roadmap.
His principle is clear. It's important to minimize low-level stressors and injuries, and to optimize the protective factors, such as light, carbohydrate, thyroid hormone, carbon dioxide, and a sense of meaningful future. It's about creating the optimal cellular environment for ATP production. That's the definition of true health.
So let's start with the most essential and often most resisted step. Fuel adequacy. Eating enough food.
Stop the chronic fuel limitation. Your cells require a massive, consistent supply of energy, of calories, to fund repair, synthesis, defense, hormone production. For anyone trying metabolic restoration, we are talking about ensuring an intake of 2,500 plus calories daily, minimum. Chronic underfueling is chronic stress, period.
Crucial to that fuel is carbohydrates. The health world still treats glucose as the enemy. Explain its metabolic superiority.
Glucose is the body's preferred fuel for metabolic efficiency. It produces significantly more ATP per unit of oxygen consumed than fat does. It's just cleaner, more efficient fuel. A high reliance on fat oxidation places a heavy burden on the mitochondria. And carbs are non-negotiable for supporting optimal thyroid hormone conversion. They directly inhibit stress hormones like cortisol by keeping blood glucose stable.
The moment you introduce sufficient carbs, you pull the emergency fuel line that cortisol was relying on.
Exactly. You turn off the stress response and switch on the high-efficiency generator.
Next, let's talk about warmth. We established cold is inherently suppressive. What is the metabolic function of seeking warmth?
Warmth is a direct reflection of a high metabolic rate. A stable body temperature, around 98.6, indicates optimal enzyme function and efficient energy production. Seeking warmth hot baths, sunlight, adequate clothing is a powerful supportive strategy. It supports thyroid activity and improves blood flow.
And sleep. We're aiming for 8 to 9 hours, but why is that period so energy intensive?
Sleep is when the body allocates maximum resources to the most complex repairs. Tissue turnover, immune system organization, nervous system consolidation. These are all high ATP activities. If you restrict sleep, you're short-circuiting that entire repair cycle.
Then there's eliminating actual stressors. We spent so much time on the deliberate ones, but we need to focus on the insidious ones.
Yes. The constant exposure to blue light late at night that suppresses melatonin and drives up cortisol. The chronic inflammatory polyunsaturated fats, the PUFAs that inhibit mitochondrial function, toxic relationships. These are the stressors that must be managed and eliminated before you even think about adding an ice bath for resilience.
And finally, movement. This isn't about punishing workouts.
Gentle, joyful movement. Walking after meals aids digestion. Brief, restorative strength training 2 to 3 times a week supports muscle mass without inducing systemic exhaustion. The goal is to move because it feels good, not to deplete yourself or earn your calories back.
And the beauty of this framework is that it aligns perfectly with what we see in the longest-lived populations. They're not biohacking. They're prioritizing support.
They prioritize sufficiency. Adequate food, gentle movement, social connection, and a low-stress, meaningful future. They are the antithesis of the Hormesis model.
And the immediate results from making this shift, from suffering to support, can be remarkably rapid.
The body is desperate for support. We see clients gain a full degree of body temperature in 2 weeks just by consistently eating a balanced breakfast, ditching the morning cold plunge, and prioritizing sleep. The body responds immediately when you give it the fuel and protection it needs.
This has been an incredibly detailed and I think necessary deep dive. The core message is clear. Your body gets stronger and finds true optimization through resources, fuel, warmth, and support. Stress for stress's sake is nothing more than accelerated depletion.
If you take away one single concept, let it be this. Cellular repair and true adaptation are entirely contingent on available ATP. Without high energy, your cells cannot successfully recover from damage. You are just breaking down tissue and wasting resources.
And if we can leave the listener with one provocative thought that builds on this entire discussion,
it is this. Consider the fundamental contradiction that the entire longevity industry faces. By focusing so intensely on triggering stress signals like autophagy through restriction and suffering, they risk aging themselves into oblivion. They are seeking a longer lifespan using mechanisms that are inherently corrosive and depleting to the whole organism, celebrating the signal while ignoring the catastrophic cost to the underlying energy reserves.
a truly sobering conclusion. And we've only scratched the surface, especially when you look at the problematic research from, say, worms and how that gets applied to humans.
Agreed. There's always more to learn in bioenergetics. But for now, stop depleting and start supporting.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope this knowledge empowers you to be skeptical of suffering and to start providing your body with the genuine, high-energy support it needs. We'll catch you next time.